Hello and welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Sint,
I'm Axin.
and we are continuing our discussion of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, while we play through Castlevania Circle of the Moon. So, knowledge is a big factor in a lot of the theming of Frankenstein, but one part in particular that I think needed its own episode was specifically language. There are a couple characters who focus pretty heavily on languages, and it's honestly pretty crucial to a lot of the story. Do you want to take a stab as to those I'm thinking of, or should I just go ahead in?
Well, the first one that comes to mind for me is Clerval.
Yep.
Because he is the merchant's son who wants to go to university and learn other languages, and his father doesn't want to let him because he can be a perfectly good merchant without learning another language, and he wants to show his father, no, learning other languages could be really helpful to our business, actually. Almost made it.
Which Victor doesn't get, but Victor doesn't get a lot of things if they don't directly apply to him. As he puts it, Clerval had never sympathized in my taste for natural science, and his literary pursuits differed wholly from those which had occupied me. He came to the university with the design of making himself complete master of the Oriental languages, and thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he turned his eyes toward the east as affording scope for his spirit of enterprise. The Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention. So yeah, Henry wants to learn languages. He's a smart guy, and there's nothing wrong with learning a couple other languages, especially if you are mercantilely minded with the possibility of expanding the family business.
Mm-hmm. It's a really smart thing to do, and he eventually gets his father to come around on the idea. He explains in terms that his father can understand, with a focus on his business, why this would be helpful. And while his father doesn't 100% agree, he considers Clerval to have made his argument well enough that he lets him go to university.
And honestly, that itself is further proof of, the importance of language. He didn't fight his father to get his way. He didn't threaten violence or anything. They talked it out. He found the right words to plead his case and convince his father, who had hitherto been completely swayed in the opposite direction. So this actually resonates for a lot of societal issues where people talk about, well, you need to be able to find a non-violent solution to situations. Well, tell me the words. What words do I need? But very often, the words you need are incredibly dense legal codes and things that most people would not casually be able to know.
Yeah.
So you're very limited in what actions you are actually able to take unless you have appropriate knowledge of the language needed, whether that is an actual language like English or French or Mandarin or what have you, or jargon for a specific field. Something I also found interesting was that there's a lot of emphasis on the Middle East in this book with regards to languages, because not only is that what Henry is interested in studying, we get Safi.
Mm-hmm. And I believe this is at least in part because there was a lot of association with the Middle East as a place of learning at this time in history.
Oh yeah.
It's why we have the numerical system we use now referred to as Arabic numerals.
I still find it funny, if you just randomly ask people, are you comfortable with your child learning Arabic numerals in school? A lot of them will just go about it because they don't know that they're just numbers.
Yep, the normal numbers we use from day to day and in most English-speaking parts of the world.
Can you imagine having to dial 911 in Roman numerals? IX, I, every single time.
Call IXII!
I don't know.
That was a joke from the Disney Hercules movie.
I forgot about that.
Yep.
Wait, why were the Greeks using Roman...
Because they were making a joke, and because of the Greco-Roman deity overlap.
I mean, it's true that Hercules was the Roman name for Heracles, so everyone else in the story was... I'm fine. Anyway, Safi. Safi comes from the Middle East, Turkey to be specific, and she is completely unable to speak the language of the land when she arrives. So there is a heavy focus on her being taught French so she can communicate with the Delacies.
And as we mentioned in a prior episode, this is how the creature learns French as well. Because...
I'll get to him later.
Yeah. Because he happens to be lurking about at this time and takes advantage of the goings-on.
Yeah. I actually just wanted to note that the way they treat Safi is refreshing to me. Because she's not treated as unintelligent for not speaking the local language. She's clearly shown to be eloquent in the tongue she was raised with. Mm-hmm. Like, Felix has no problem talking to her in that language, but she doesn't know a word of French until they teach her. And she's not made fun of for this at all. The Delacies are very welcoming, very understanding, and very patient with her by all accounts. And very often today, we do not see the same understanding for those who are trying to learn another language.
And this, I think, is, to be blunt, a uniquely American problem. Because we are such a monoculture with regards to the use of language, being exclusively using English, to the point where there's even people who will get incredibly hostile with anybody who speaks more languages than just English in this country. This is not something that happens incredibly often in Europe, where...
I was going to say, like, I would hazard a guess that the UK might have similar issues, just from the very little I have seen on the Brexit situation, but I don't want to get into that trash fire right now.
That may be true, but for the majority...
I mean, it would also explain heavy influence on us, because...
Absolutely. But yeah, for the majority of Europe, this is not the case. Most people in Europe are at least partially bilingual. They may not be fully fluent in whatever their second language is, but most know at least a smattering of English, in addition to whatever their local language is. And this is even true to some degree in Canada, where it's not uncommon for people to know a smattering of French, even if they don't live in Quebec. Awesome. I needed this.
But this brings us to, honestly, like, the major consideration of language learning and the importance thereof, the creature.
Mm-hmm.
Up until he encounters the DeLacy family and learns language by spying on Safi's lessons, without knowing this is creepy because, well, he doesn't know anything, he's 2. He has no ability to describe anything he's experiencing. He is completely confused, alone, and lost. And it's not until he can gain the power of language that he can start to rationalize what's happening and make it somewhat more understandable for him. this is huge. And this is not an uncommon phenomenon. Like, if you don't have the words to describe something, it's a lot harder to fix a situation. I imagine we're going to talk about this eventually on this channel, but 1984, Newspeak was designed the way it is for a reason. To limit the tools for describing things. They would cut out words in the dictionary every year, as many as they could, to take away that common ground for communication.
This is something that has been spoken about extensively in the real world with regards to how people communicate. It's a known thing. And just the ability to communicate concepts can completely change the way a situation is observed to be, or perceived to be, rather. There was a story in a YouTube video I watched regarding a gay man in the 80s trying to talk about his life with a support group and having difficulty doing so because while he was pretty happy with his life at the time, all of the language used at the time by that community came with an association with loneliness, misery, and sadness. They did not at the time have the language to really communicate their situation with their community in a way that didn't have the implications of the majority bolted on.
Yep, and this is why I think... I'm going to go a little further on this.
Yep.
When you are unable to fully communicate something, or it's very, very hard to get others to understand you. And this kind of is really well seen with the creature because, well, we spend a lot of time talking about, with regard to this book, and we'll probably get into this more later, what actually makes something human versus a monster. And in a lot of science fiction, what makes a strange new species that we encounter worth interacting with seems to be its ability to communicate with us. And up until the creature had access to language, he couldn't do that. He was just this horrifying, oh god, it's going to kill us, that people shot at when they saw him. But when he was able to speak, and he went to Mr. DeLacy, who didn't see him first, he was actually able to have a fairly lengthy conversation until everything fell apart when people saw him. But without the luxury of language, it's nigh impossible to see the creature as anything other than just a creature, a monster, because how else would you know?
And honestly, that comes across to many readers very easily and very clearly, even if they don't understand that's what's coming across. You've said on multiple occasions that you've had students in your classes who have basically said, why can't we help the monster, the creature? I feel so bad for him, I feel so sorry for him. Things like that.
Yeah, I have a lot of really empathetic kids. It's really great. But Shelley goes out of her way to show that Victor set his creation up for failure, even unconsciously, because he never gave him a name, he never gave him language. And those are two things that people tend to need to stop thinking of things as things. I mean, when you give something a name, you've sort of humanized it already. Like, even if it's something that's just like a Roomba. If you call your Roomba Little Sweepy, it's now your friend and your pet. Community did a really fun bit with this in the first episode. I can pick up this pencil, tell you its name is Steve, and then snap it in half, and a part of you dies a little bit on the inside. We like to humanize things whenever we can. So, with a situation like Frankenstein, the author has to go out of her way to dehumanize the creation to make Victor's actions seem at all palatable, and she even deliberately, I think, stops short of making Victor actually sympathetic, because you can see that the creature, despite these disadvantages, is trying his best, and if not for the deformities that were forced upon him, he could have succeeded. Once he has language, he is a sensitive and eloquent speaker, able to carefully plead his case convincingly. And imagine what that mind could have been like if it had actually been cared for.
The creature's story is one of lost potential at no fault of his own. He is doomed to a life where he cannot achieve almost any of his desires because of the faults that Victor built into him. And his own unfortunate inability to do anything about them. And even then, we see him having taken the time and effort to correct those he can, but it's unfortunately not enough, and in a lot of ways, too little too late.
But yeah, that's my little language soapbox.
I think that wraps it up for today. We'll see y'all next time.
Until next.